everyone. So today, me and Tejas are doing this presentation. Have the honor of bringing the 4-day conclave to a final and have the difficulty of summarizing everything that you've heard during the last 4 days of the event. So hope you won't be too judgmental about us. And especially in line of us doing this work without a lot of the program for this year, or let's say most of the program for this financial year 2022-2023, not yet being finalized. So today we have the challenging task of grabbing your interest by what we have had in the past and making assumptions about the future. So let's see. Hope you are going to enjoy it. So I think everyone knows Tejas, who is a registered migration agent, member of the Migration Institute of Australia, director of Aussizz Group Adelaide, and a qualified education consultant of Australia and New Zealand. And for the people who don't know me, I'm also a registered migration agent, and I'm also working for Aussizz Adelaide. And I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Adelaide. So I'm, additionally to my practical work as a registered migration agent, I'm also doing research into migration law. Okay, so this chat that we're going to have today, you and us, it's going largely to be interactive. We'll be happy to answer any of the questions in the end of the sessions. Today we're going to have first me talking about this migration year in facts and figures. Not just because facts and figures are something that I like as I'm a researcher, but also because when we understand the figures and what's behind them, we can draw conclusions why the government is doing this, why the government has one program instead of the other, why the government increases the quota for a particular visa and decreases the quota for the other visa, or why is there unlimited quota for a certain visa. So once we learn to read the statistics, we become cleverer as consumers. We make clever decisions as consumers and, of course, as aspiring migrants. And then in the second chunk of this conversation, Tejas is going to look at what do we have now? What is the situation now with states and territories? And I will give you a spoiler. Most of them, if not all, have not yet announced their new July 2023 financial requirements, other than those requirements that have been pre-announced by the states in the last financial year. So Tejas will bear the burden of hypothesizing, looking at what was in the past, and possibly looking as well bravely into the future. Okay, so going to the facts and figures, what matters is we have this migration program of the new financial year, which is 160,000 as it was last year, okay? So that's the first important figure you need to know. There has been no increase, there has been no decrease. We're at the same figure, yep. So I know a lot of people had hopes for a bigger migration program. Unlikely, at least this financial year, unlikely. We're set with the same program. I guess that this is the heritage we've had from the Liberal government, because the Labour took over only recently. We don't know the Labour plans, but for this year, it's going to remain at 160K. Nothing too exciting, but nothing bad as well. So sometimes when there is no change, this is good as well. The components within the program have been slightly different, though. So we have the skill, the family, and the special eligibility places. The special eligibility places is a very limited category, so let's be negligent about that. It doesn't really matter for most of your immigration aspirations. Now, the skill in the family category is huge. Family visas are all partner parent visas, remaining relative, etc. visas, and the skilled visas are a huge component of skilled independent, state nominated, employer sponsored, etc. visas. So the skill and the family category is going to be the focus. Importantly, comparisons with what we had before and what we have now will help us understand what was in the government's head when they designed the new program. So let's have a look. I think, again, this is a very much liberal legacy, in my opinion, because what Scott Morrison said, I think times and times again in the past, was we have to focus on the needs of employers. Migration must be employer-driven. That's what he used to say. And look, the employer-sponsored category, it was big enough, but it went up even from last year's 22,000 to 30,000. Yeah, big and became even bigger. Focus on employer-sponsored migration. So you have an employer who would like to sponsor you, that may be your pathway. But please remember, I always tell people, sometimes students come, sometimes novices come, sometimes people come who have had no work experience in their lifetime and want to be sponsored. Remember, this is not going to happen. For employer-sponsored visas, for some DAMA programs, you need at least 1 year experience. For all classical 482s, 494s, you need 2 or 3 years respectively. So these programs are not designed for university graduates. They're designed for someone with some experience. Skilled independent. Wow, that's certainly a visa we're going to talk more about this seminar, because we've received multiple questions throughout the last financial year, like, what do you think? What do you think if we put an EOI for the 189? Skilled independence is the 189, which so much resembles this classical model of immigration that was so cherished by so many people coming to Australia, that you don't need a state to nominate you. You don't need an employer. You just have the points. You have the skills assessment, you have the work experience, you've claimed your points correctly, you can migrate. Very much loved and cherished program. And everyone pretty much, I would say at least 50% of people coming to our consultations keep asking, what do you think? Is the 189 visa dead or alive? So from the statistics, we see that it can be alive in the new financial year. In practice, we may not necessarily think so, but we're certainly going to these figures today in a little bit more detail. But as you can see, statistics shows that the 6,500 places in the last financial year, barely anyone could get through with the 189 visa, have grown into 1,600 and something places, 16,000 and something places, which basically means that this figure has almost tripled. But does it mean that the quota that has been given is actually going to be given? You know, one thing is to design the program, but the other thing is whether they will use this quota. We'll talk about that today. Regional, almost tripling. Okay, and there's a little bit of a contrast between the growth of the skilled independent program and the tripling of the regional, because the skilled independent program, we'll talk about that today, was largely the main fear in the minds of the people who designed the regional program was to keep people in regional areas of Australia, as opposed to the 189 scheme that, in fact, as they believed, created the additional burden on Australia's big cities. Yeah, skilled independent, you can live anywhere, no conditions on the visa. People flock to Sydney and Melbourne. That was to be avoided in the past years. Interestingly, skilled independent triples, regional almost triples. So it's like maintaining both focuses, right? Difficult to imagine how both would work at the same time, you know, whether there would not be any conflict between you trying to motivate people to go to regional, giving additional places, but at the same time, giving additional places for the 189. But we'll talk about that in greater detail in further slides. State territory nominated, again, is the focus of this year. Fewer places for investors and business people, and twice fewer places for the Global Talent Program. So I always say to clients, Global Talent Program is extremely competitive. Extremely competitive. Well, you can see now it has become even more competitive than that. Fewer places. I guess this problem is under threat in the future. Yeah, there's been a lot of criticism in academia, and I know in business as well, of the criteria of selection in the Global Talent Program. So I guess even the Liberal government themselves, when they were in power and putting these figures, that even they have lost trust in the survival of this program in the long term, or at least realize that the numbers in this program have to be reduced. So if you think you're in the global talent audience, then you need to know that it's going to be even harder than before to get through the global talent. And distinguished talent is basically everyone else who's not the global talent. So if you're a Michelin star cook, for example, you wouldn't get into the global talent because it's for specific industries only, but you would be able to go into distinguished talent. However, you can see that the number of visas granted, possibly granted, would be minuscule in this category. Okay, yeah, going into that, going into the family category in a little bit more detail. You can see the partner visas and the child visas. The child category quota has remained the same. The parent has increased slightly. I said it's not slightly, it's actually substantially, almost a 50% increase. And the partner has decreased significantly from 72,000 to 40,000. Importantly, and this is the first year that the government has acknowledged that, partner and child visa applications are, in fact, must not, in fact, be subject to a ceiling. So a cap should not be put. The numbers should not be limited. Okay? That means even though, for example, the partner visa applications quota decreased, it's demand driven, as the government have now put it now. So even if you are not in the 40,500 and you're applying, the application must be processed, importantly, because you can't discriminate against kids and partners. Yeah, these are members of family unit, must be processed. So the government is obliged to do that, and that's why they've added this year this disclaimer that although they've put a figure, the figure is only an expected figure, and the program, in fact, is not capped, not subject to a ceiling. Okay, now this is the thing no one is happy about, and I guess half of you may leave this presentation as of now, but still, you know, I'm trying to be positive about life. The other half that will not leave the presentation after this slide will remain, and we'll talk to you. Yeah, we don't know the nomination allocations for 2022-2023. When we speak about nominations, we mean the 190, the 491, and the Business Innovation and Investment Program. So these three are where the state decides whether they like you or not, whether they will nominate you or not. We don't know how many people will be given, how many places will be given this year to each of the states. However, we can look at last year's figures, okay? Because possibly, not necessarily, but possibly, the situation might repeat in some of the areas. Yeah. So look, last year we had these figures. Okay. And you could see that last year's winners were obviously South Australia. Huge figures for South Australia, 2,600 190s and 3,330 for 491s, which basically is almost 6,000 seats. Compare that with a bigger and much more industrialized WA, which had in total 491 plus 190 only slightly more than 3,000 seats. Okay. And then even if you compare that with Victoria, we had 50% more seats than Victoria. It can take forever to talk about the benefits of South Australia. I don't want to offend anyone, but it's really a great state to be in terms of the scale of our migration program. Huge Victoria had restricted nomination requirements, 4,000 seats. South Australia had almost 6,000 seats and much wider nomination requirements, where a lot of the people could meet the nomination requirements and have fast processing times. And even if you compare us to NSW, for example, you might say that NSW has the biggest program, 7,600. But look, SA is almost at 6,000. But can you compare NSW and SA? How big is NSW? And how small is SA? I don't mean territory-wise, but I mean population-wise, migrant-wise, competition-wise. So just shows how much focus there was last year on SA. We hope we'll have similar numbers this financial year. Okay, so I know that people love this part of the presentation because everyone wants not to spend a particular time in a particular state, not to do additional work to meet nomination requirements, but instead revert to the good old 189. And so it's in this slide, I'm basically asking a question whether it is a resurgence of the 189. Remember one of the slides where I said the quota has tripled. Yeah. But it's not enough that the places have tripled, because it doesn't mean that their invitations will actually be issued. 16,000 for New Year compared to 6,000 in the last financial year. Let's look at this graph. So basically what they did, they were decreasing the seats, as you can see, from 16, 17 onwards. And this decrease of 189 seats was dramatic in 2019 and 2020. And, plateaued at a very low level in 2021, 2022 financial years. Became just minuscule, tiny, not able to accommodate anyone. Then that's why we had these crazy thresholds, with the threshold, legal threshold being 65 points. In fact, people needed 100, 85, 90, 95 in the independent program in the 189 to be able to get through. But look what's been happening in 2023, last invitation round. We have had a growth in places. And this has basically, the invitations in the March quarter have basically doubled. Does that mean that we're in fact planning to use the 189 quota we've set for this year? Possibly. Okay, so look, whenever you want to understand the future and what the future holds for you, especially in light of no skilled occupation lists in the States as of now, you always need to understand, what has driven government policy. Why has the government reacted like that? Why was 189 so small all these years? Okay, so there was the Morrison's plan of congestion busting in major Australian cities. And there was a huge backlog in partner visa applications. I've borrowed both of these reasons from Dr. Abul Rizvi, so I'm acknowledging him in his presentation, who is an independent Australia columnist and former Deputy Secretary of the Department of Immigration. I borrowed some of the data from him and as well as these opinions. Yeah, so Sydney and Melbourne became too congested and too many partner visa applications. So the program had to be readjusted according to the thoughts of Mr. Rizvi, who had also experience in the department at a very senior role in the past. The program had to be readjusted, and so the 189 places shrank. Okay, so these are the reasons he's giving as a scholar. Source from the DHA, but the chart is also borrowed from Mr. Rizvi. So look at the invitations. That's what we have already seen in the previous chart, but it shows better in more detail the invitation rounds. Okay, so look, the best we've had over a lifetime. You know that people are invited quarterly now for the 189. So the best we've had was I think the March invitation round, 2021, about 500 people invited. But then look, March 2022, that has jumped to 1,000 again. A sign of a possible resurgence. I'm still very careful with my words. I don't want to say that the 189 is back full scale, because I think if it's back full scale, then my question is, who would ever need the state nomination programs? Who would ever want to live in regional areas if the 189 was put back on its, on its huge component that it had before 2016, 2017? Yeah. Look, 1,000 invitations issued on 21st of April, 2022. Big compared to the 400 to 500 we used to have before. This is big. But still, still remember, as of now, not being able to accommodate all of our aspiring migrants, obviously. So look, and in this slide, I'm incorporating the second most popular question from people. As the first is the 189, the second most popular question from people is the 491 family sponsored, because a lot of people have an uncle, an aunt, a brother here in Australia and are wondering whether that person could help them. Okay, so they can if you have your occupation in the long-term occupation list, have a skills assessment, and that relative is actually living in regional Australia. So look, we can see 491, 500 in July, 200 in October, 200 in January. So January is when 2022 started, and 500 in April. So it's a bit of a fluctuation, not getting anywhere. You're still at the same level, not getting anywhere. But if you look at the 189, yeah, obviously dramatic increase. July 21 invites, October 21 invites, Jan 21 invites, April 1,000. Okay. You might be interested in that. Who actually was invited in that huge 1,000 seat round? Because one thing is to look that the invitation rate is growing, but another thing is looking at the points that people were able to go through, whether you would be able to have these points. Yeah, so that's important. Agricultural consultant for the 189, no invitations at all. For the 491, 65 points. Scientist, no invitations. All these people, scientists, audiologists, biochemists, biotechnologists, surprisingly, the life sciences, and chemical engineer, not invited for 189 at all. Yeah, which shows that the 189 is still early, still too early to talk about the resurgence of 189, because look how many allegedly popular occupations, which are in demand generally in Australia, have not been inviting no matter what the EOI score was. Yeah, and that's where I say I'm very careful with my words, because I don't want you to go apply for a 189 and then hopelessly sit and wait for not being invited, not being invited, not being invited. In contrast, the people for the 491 is all of these occupations were invited if they had between 65 and 75 points. Now look, chemist and childcare center manager, 90 points for the 189. Look, very high points, and also childcare center manager, very difficult occupation, difficult to get skills assessment. I haven't had personally many people who managed to meet the requirement for the childcare center manager skills assessment. And even chemist, such an occupation, which is again in demand, would require 90 points, which is huge for an independent migration visa. Okay, chiropractor, clinical psychologist, diagnostic and interventional, early childhood teacher, emergency medicine specialist, all these people in the federal skilled list in the high demand. Look at the points, very high points. And then environmental consultant, environmental manager, environment, everyone connected with environment, simply not invited. Okay, for family, the family column is on the right. It was both not invited and some of the higher points. JPs, intensive care, medical, midwife, 90 points for the 189. Yeah, so you don't have the state nomination points. Very high. Life scientist, microbiologist. So all the life scientist category not invited at all, but they were invited in the family 491. Look, other doctors, well, ophthalmologists got to 100. You needed to get to 100 to be invited, which is wow, which is extremely complex, yeah? Other doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, registered nurses, 90 points. Yeah, very high points. But at the same time, points were significantly lower for the registered nurses in the family 491, 65, 65, 75, and 65. Look, we continue with nurses, and they were all at 90 for the 189, but significantly lower for the 491. Yeah, situation continues with some of the allied health workers, special needs teachers, still very, very, very high points. Okay, so which conclusions can we draw from the data that we've discussed today? 189 would have to invite people in more different occupations if it is expected that the quota for the year is met. Okay, so if we want to get 16,000 people as planned, we can't be putting 95, 95, 95, 100. Or if we are putting 95, 100, we should allow more occupations to be invited, because you saw some were simply not invited at all. So maybe the pass mark, if they decide to issue all 16,000 invitations planned for this year, maybe the pass mark would have to go slightly down, or more occupations, occupation categories would have to be invited. Okay. We do think that the fact that the 189 and the 491 have picked up generally, we think it's a positive sign, but as I say, I'm very careful with my word. Exercise a lot of caution, because you wouldn't want to have these two as your major migration options, or as your only migration options. This is what we always tell to people. Migration requires planning, and very often it requires a backup plan. This is extremely important because, as you have seen, since 2016, 2015, 2016, 2017, 189 and 491 have not been very reliable options. So for several years now, they have not been reliable options. So don't rely on them only. You can consider them, but they should not be viewed as a main migration option. You should additionally look at other options, including employer-sponsored migration, including state and territory nomination. Importantly, as many applications for partner visas can be made as necessary. So if you have a partner, not a problem. We can do that. Regional and state territory nomination will more than double. We'll continue this trend, will continue. And that's absolutely great, because areas like Adelaide, Tasmania, Western Australia, regional Queensland are going to have a nice quota this year once it's announced, and hopefully an influx of skilled migrants. And the last summary point is global talent visa has become even more competitive. So Australian PhD graduates in the target sectors or people applying for this visa internationally should know your chances have decreased even further. Yeah, must be very, 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 very competitive applicants to get through this visa program. And before Tejas continues with this presentation, we'll give you our contact details, because I know that perhaps not many people survive till the end of our session. Perhaps someone wants to have a coffee or a meal or whatever, and then you don't know how to reach to us, these wonderful two presenters. You can have our contact details now, so that you would be able to contact us directly using our corporate emails for any queries, or you can call the office in the number below, and they will help you to book an appointment with us, so that we would be able to keep in touch and to chat to you about your migration options. Tejas, on to you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Kostya. So hello, everyone. My name is Tejas, and I'm also a registered migration agent here in Aussizz Group. So thanks, everyone, over the last 4 wonderful days. We've had a lot of different sessions, a lot of people attended, and obviously we wanted to give more information on different state nominations for this financial year. So obviously we have screened through all the states and territories' latest updates. So what I'll be covering up is state-wise what we have for now, and obviously we're still waiting for a lot of states to announce for this financial year. So what you have on the screen is basically the last year's nominations. Obviously, if you see New South Wales, South Australia, and generally Victoria led the number of nominations. Queensland should have more spaces. Obviously, it was not there. For the size of the state, Tasmania also had a relatively good migration program last year, more than 2,500, which is not too bad for the state economy and the state migration plan. So if you look at the overall numbers, I think it focused more on the regional migrations, including South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, Western Australia, regional New South Wales as well. 190 in New South Wales and Victoria is there, but then obviously compared to the numbers in other states, it's relatively smaller in general. Yeah, so these are the 3 states which we had last year leading in terms of number of nominations. Number 1 is New South Wales, 4,721 nominations approved. South Australia, 4,224. Victoria, 4,000 plus. So these are 3 states which nominated maximum number of applicants for 190 and 491. So when you plan your migration or your studies for being an international graduate, or which state would be better for you for your 190 or 491 visa, these are the states you should be considered. Obviously, you should not be writing off Tasmania and Northern Territory as well. They are also very good state in terms of the migration prospect. So as Kostya mentioned before, what you should be comparing is number of graduates in that state, number of international applicants in their state compared to the migration program of that particular state. And then you see what are your prospect of getting invited, because the bigger cities will have more people, obviously, even though they have a larger migration program, but then you'll be competing with more people there. Yeah, so just number does not. So these are the factors which should be considering as well, the number of international graduates in that particular state. So if you consider, let's say, Victoria and New South Wales, more than 150,000 graduates in each of these states, which means even if they have 10,000 places for 190 and 491, you'll be competing with a lot of people there. South Australia, Tasmania, WA will be having less than 40,000, less than 50,000 graduates in their particular states, which means your competition to get invitation for any of the state nomination programs will be much lower. The competition endpoints that can help you get above the line, obviously, because of these particular figures. And obviously, the processing time in that state will be lower because the less number of applications the state is receiving. So if you look at the Victoria, let's say last year, the processing, the method of their processing was different, where you have to apply for the ROI every 3 months, and then obviously they will be looking at the ROIs and invite you. So it takes more time for you to get invited in certain states rather than applying for the state nomination directly, let's say in South Australia or WA or Northern Territory, and get invitation in a matter of a couple of months. Obviously, the occupation list and program requirements are also flexible in some of the states as well. So you need to look at the numbers as well as the requirements. So each state will be flexible in terms of which occupation they want to focus on. Every state has the different economy, different skill list because of the local economy requirement. Not every state will be happy to sponsor every occupation except the small ones because they want to invite maximum number of international graduates or international applicants as in the work visa holders in their state. But if you look at the bigger states, then obviously they will have to be very specific in terms of some of the IT sectors or key sectors, including medical, to make sure they are they're attracting the right talent in only those sectors where they face the maximum skill shortages. What are the best states you should be focused on this financial year? You should be compared to last financial year. These are the 3 states which should be your number 1 priority. Obviously, number 1 is South Australia. Regional area, you get additional 5 points if you study here 2 years. Big migration program, small number of graduates compared to bigger cities, part-time work environment, requirements only for state nomination, so which is only 20 hours a week in most of the cases. Some of the occupation has an employment waivers as well if you are an ESSA graduate. Similarly, Tasmania, regional area, you get additional points, you get additional graduate visa as well if you study in those areas. Bigger migration program compared to number of graduates, only short employment period in the nominated occupation requirements, which means as soon as you finish your studies, you might be able to apply for your state nomination relatively faster. Employment requirements are waived off in most of the graduate requirements in Tasmania as well, which means if you are a Tasmanian graduate, you will be getting state nomination much easier. Number 3 is WA, again, regional area. You get regional points for your studies. It has a lot of skill shortages in some of the areas, including mining, engineering, trades. You would have a much flexible state nomination requirement because they require either an employment contract or previous employment for your state nomination. So again, you have very flexible requirements in all these 3 states if we talk about the state nomination, and we expect that this will continue for this financial year as well. Unfortunately, the most of the state, I've screened through all of the state's requirements this morning as well. What I understood so far is obviously they're just a lot of them just waiting for the allocations to be finalized. So as soon as the allocations are finalized for each state, they will announce the migration program. As far as the requirements are concerned, except maybe Tasmania or Victoria, I'm not expecting a lot of states to change the requirement, or even Queensland maybe. So if you talk about New South Wales, South Australia, WA, Northern Territory would have most likely the same requirements which are available on their website. So they will announce the newer skill occupation list for this financial year, and then they will start the program as soon as they have the allocations approved and ready to go. Tasmania is still processing the last year's application, so they're finalizing the application. They are just waiting for the allocation to be approved so they can invite you in the skill select. So they're still processing if you have lodged your application last year. Very much similar for ACT as well, that you can still lodge your metrics, and if you get invited, you will be able to get the skill select invitation once they have the nomination ready to go. So most of the states, the requirements will be still there, and it will be still similar requirements which are they continuing from last financial year. They would be pretty much just waiting for the nomination numbers to be finalized for 190 and 491, and then they can start the migration program for financial year 2022-23. However, these requirements can be changed. It can be changed depending on the number of seats they get, number of occupations they want to keep, and also what are the strategic focus for this financial year. If we talk about South Australia in general, there are different streams available in regards to how you can achieve your nominations. I've covered a detail about South Australian requirement in my session yesterday, and most of our sessions are for state-specific sessions. We already done that yesterday and day before. So if you are based in any of these states and you want to know about the state-specific requirement, you can refer to those sessions, which will be available live on YouTube very shortly as well. And again, we'll be doing a lot of small Facebook Live and other video sessions as well, as soon as each state decide the migration program in terms of the number of allocations. They focus the skill occupation list very shortly. It could be next week, or it could be late like next week or a week after. But mostly it will be by third week of July. We'll have every state's statistics and information available as well. Next slide, Costa. Yeah, so as far as the state nominations requirements are concerned, I think we will not cover up that because we have some questions. So we'll try to cover up those questions, and we only have about 10 minutes left. Yeah, that will do. So in this financial year, what can you do to have a better chance about getting the nomination? So make sure you have your skill assessment ready, because a lot of students get confused, especially with this new announcement of the graduate visa, that you don't need a skill assessment if you have studied 2 years. So a lot of students are mixing that announcement with the skill migration. For any skill migration, you do require skill assessment. So you make sure you have a skill assessment for any skill migration visas. Provisional skill migration assessment will not be helpful. So if you have your skill assessment only for the graduate visa, that cannot be used for your permanent visa. Make sure you understand your realistic chances and decide your migration pathway accordingly. So not every occupation will be sponsored if you're based in Victoria or Queensland or Tasmania or whatever. So you need to understand your occupation, what are the pathways, and which states will be better for you, and then make a move. Talk to obviously one of our staff members who are registered migration agent to understand your detailed prospect about your occupation and draw your future plans according to that. If you have an employer and you meet the employment requirements, as in 2 years requirements for your TSS, the 482 visa, then you should also explore that option, because employer-sponsored visa will be much easier to get through if you have an employer who can sponsor you and you have 2 years of experience. You can also look at the Dharma occupation list, because there are currently more than 7 Dharma occupations, Dharma agreements available throughout Australia. And apparently the Dharma agreement has more flexible requirements for a lot of occupations for the employer-sponsored categories. So giving you an example, let's say if you're an aged care worker working in a regional South Australia, you can get sponsored if you have an employer who can sponsor you. The requirement is only Certificate 3 in aged care and 1 year of experience as an aged care worker, which is much flexible compared to normal 482, which requires you to have 2 years experience in last 5 years, and it has to be full-time equivalent. So you should explore that option and always have a backup plan. So first, you need to understand what is your occupation. Do you have a skill assessment? Studies does not give you PR. It's an occupation which gives you a permanent residency. So whatever studies you have done, you need to understand what are the occupation which will be leading you towards the permanent residency. Then get your skill assessment sorted. So make sure you have a skill assessment and then plan your migration pathways. As we mentioned earlier, don't just rely on one option. So let's say if you have good points and you applied for your 189, that's good, but then don't just rely on 189, have a backup plan. Choose different options as well. So make sure you have enough options to get through your migration journey easily. Obviously, you need to understand also in terms of choosing the right migration agents as well. So as Hassan Costa mentioned, don't go with just lowest fees, but obviously about the reputation, the knowledge, the options you get through as well in different process. These are just a quick facts about us throughout Australia. I think there is a last slide as well, which gives an update about, yes, so there are the offices. You can visit one of our offices close to you. And also, if you have liked all our sessions, or any of our sessions, or any kind of feedback, make sure you do give us the feedback through the hashtag, that is hashtag Aussizz Conclave 2022. And I think we'll just go quickly with the questions because we have very limited time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Tejas. Yeah, just a sec. I will look into the questions. Wow, there are many. So I will go from.
Yeah, so Varshini is asking, have they released the new requirements? So Varshini, as I just mentioned, most of the states have already got the nomination requirements available on the websites. So as far as I can understand what's the strategies behind it, it would be that they might not change the nomination requirement. They will just make the changes in terms of the occupation list, and they might have an occupation specific requirement if they want to make any changes.
Okay, can a long-term resident be working as carer lead to 491 and 190? And I have done Bachelor in Public Health. So importantly, long-term resident leads to 491 if you work as a carer. Doesn't normally lead to 190. And Bachelor of Public Health. Okay, so you would need a skills assessment, for example, as health promotion officer. So if you haven't worked post-bachelor as health promotion officer, if you don't have a skills assessment, you wouldn't be able to use the long-term resident pathway. I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions that clients have. They think that just being here for 3+ years and working as a carer would suffice. No, guys, you need a skill assessment. That's what we've been saying, I think, every single consultation when we meet a long-term resident. And fortunately, for some people, it's easy because if you're an accountant, you just go to IPA, you apply and get your skills assessment within 2 days, right? Simple. But if you are a Bachelor of Public Health, then it's much more challenging because you would have to go to VETASES, and VETASES would tell you, look, you need 1 year experience, for example, as health promotion officer. But if you have 1 year experience as health promotion officer, like how sensible is it for you to work as a carer? You would be applying for 190 as a health promotion officer, possibly, right? So that's a very serious challenge that you need to consider. You need to have a skills assessment, okay? Yeah. Okay, Tejas, do you see any other questions?
Yeah, there are a few. So the few questions about the PMSO, the priority migration skill occupation list. Someone asking if any benefit of having the skill occupation under that list, or will there be any changes? There are two different questions. So look, the priority migration skill occupation list was designed when the borders were closed. So obviously, because we don't have the border restriction anymore right now, so I don't see this program will be a long-term continued. So they might make some changes because every occupation should be prioritized on base of the employer-sponsored visas anyway. And then PMSOL was designed for the employer-sponsored visas only. So if you are applying for any other visas, then this does not apply to you basically. But as far as the PMSOL is concerned, then we are expecting that arrangements will no longer be there for long term because it was designed when the borders were closed.
Working contract job on ABN counts towards experienced telecom engineer already has full-time experience pre-COVID. Look, if the question is about South Australia, I'm not sure about other states, but I think they have other states would have similar policies. They just will correct me if I'm wrong. Historically, I don't know why, but we don't like self-employed people here in Australia. I think even when we give them a mortgage, we don't want to give them a mortgage. We create tougher requirements for them to get a mortgage. Even if you're Australian citizen or permanent resident, self-employed, you face tougher choices in life, right? Because you have to prove your income because it's too dependent on this business that you've created. In migration, it's pretty much the same. You would have to go in South Australia, for example, you would have to go into Talent and Innovators program, which would limit your options because in that stream, competition would be harsh. You would be competing with other self-employed people, with other businesses, and then they will look how much turnover you bring. Do you employ Australians? Are you in the target sector? Are you in the growth sector, etc.? So we normally do not advise people that self-employment is a good option. But we have to look at each particular scenario to look at all the fines. So book a consultation, we'll be able to discuss that.
Tejas, any further questions? Point I would also recommend is obviously about the occupation. Because not every occupation you can work as a self-employed, because I've seen some of the occupation where the applicant was getting paid on the ABN as a sole trader, where it is not an self-employment, it is basically an employment. So you need to realize, obviously, that what are your occupations? Can they be done as an independent? Do you have a service agreement between your company and the company which is giving you the work? So as far as your occupation as a telecommunication engineer is concerned, if you work as an engineer independently, then it depends. But if you work in NBN as a field engineer or as a technician, where they do a lot of work on a contractual basis, then you might have a service agreement in place, and then you can work on ABN. So it really depends on your occupation. So I think the best idea would be speaking to someone professionally, and then see if that's possible to be used in terms of the migration and the visa process, even if it's on ABN.
Yeah. Tejas, next question is yours. Hi, any special pathways for RN?
It depends, obviously, where are you based, but then, yeah, every state would love to have registered nurses in current time, obviously. But every state will have different requirements in terms of which specific RN they would like to nominate. If you're based in South Australia, then obviously all of the RNs are welcome. But then, let's say Victoria, specific about certain registered nurses codes as well. But then, yeah, registered nurses best time of the year where you can get a permanent residency very quickly.
Okay, beautiful.
There's a 482 question. If the 482 is approved, then I get invite for 190. Would it be a problem? No, absolutely, there is no problem. But then you have to make sure that you continue working for that employer on the 482 until your 190 is granted, because you have to make sure that you meet all the obligations on your current visa, which is 482.
Okay, yeah. Do we need English proficiency requirement for skill assessment of accounting? Wow. Yes, you would have to do a 65 each for IPA, CPA, and other organizations like that. You would have to do 65 each PTE or 7 each IELTS for accounting. Okay. Can we apply for both the 491? These are short questions, so I can take two. Can we apply for both 491 and 190 at the moment? Have EOY for both? Yes, certainly. You can. You can tick both options in Skill Select, but then Skill Select is one thing, but the question is whether you would be able to meet the state nomination requirements. And there, perhaps the state would decide on whether it's a 491 or 190. Wow, I think we have questions piling up. Tejas Networking and System Administrator at 90 points. On own, please let me know the best options. I'm not sure the question is fully understandable with regard what that visa is.
I think it's asking for 189. If 189 can be done for the long-term resident, not long-term, sorry, the MLT SSL occupation based, then yes, it can be invited at 95 points or 90 points, but then you have to wait for the next invitation round. I'll restart from Charlene. There is a question: can we apply for both 190 and 491 for IT occupations in SA? Charlene, you can, but then obviously the requirements are different. For 491, you normally require 1 year experience if you're an interstate or overseas graduate. For 190, you need longer experience, which is normally 2 years full time. So it depends on your situation, which you're eligible for. You can apply either 190 or 491.
Please guide on probability of family sponsor visa for an NSW. Oh my goodness, and kind of questions keep piling up, and I even lose the previous ones. Okay, I'm a family sponsor for NSW. I'm a citizen living in regional area. Yeah, so family sponsor, you would be able to sponsor a relative if they have a skill assessment, if they have an occupation on the skills list, and if you're living anywhere in a regional Australia. So we don't know whether they meet all these requirements, and they must have also English. So better send all their details to us, and we'll be able to assess that.
Two quick questions. How long is the ROI valid for? So obviously it depends on the state. Every state has different processing, but South Australia, once you have lodged ROI, they will finalize the ROI whenever they can. And there is no validity period. But then if you talk about New South Wales, then I think every quarter they restart the ROI process where you have to lodge a new ROI. It's same thing with Victoria, that new financial year, you'll have to lodge a new ROI if you want to be considered for state nomination programs. And Araj asked if any updates on other states like NT or ACT, and also someone asked about Queensland. So Araj, if as far as the requirements are concerned, Northern Territory and ACT have not announced anything in terms of different requirements. ACT did announce a new occupation list, which did include a lot of other occupations as well, so which is good news for international graduates and people who are working in ACT. What we are waiting for is obviously a state nomination allocations for 190 and 491. What are the numbers? Because obviously the 2022-23, the allocation for skill migration is higher. So we expect all the state will have either similar or higher allocations for the 190 and 491 program, which is good news for especially the students who are based in Australia, that you'll have a good chance to get nominated for any of these programs. The requirements would be pretty much similar. We'll have to for ACT, you'll have to follow the nomination, the Canberra metric stream. For Northern Territory, you have to meet the advertised requirement, which is already available on the website. And in terms of the Queensland as well, we're just waiting for the new allocations announcement as well. So as soon as that's available, most likely Queensland will start the migration program in August this year.
Okay. What is the best stage for IT software developer? Well, look, you have to look at two things: whether you can find a job, and what's the migration program like in the state you're moving to. Okay, so although there are many more jobs in Melbourne and Sydney than elsewhere in Australia for software developers, if you look at regional areas, this is where you actually have a bigger migration quota. So in my opinion, South Australia would be pretty good for a software developer. So if you find a job, there is no problem of being invited here. We also don't have the high points requirement as other states have. So for us, it's not, you don't need to break through the points barrier. People with 65 or 70 points could be invited in South Australia as a developer if you have a job. So that's the important thing. Hi guys, what about master's graduate? Look, just a small comment. I see that some people keep piling up their questions and others are asking why their questions have not been answered. You just have to understand that physically there are potentially dozens, if not hundreds, questions in this feed. We'll try to answer as many as we can, but if we fail, you would have to contact us separately. Sorry for that, and thank you for understanding. Hi guys, what about master's graduate to know the childhood? What the stream is easier way to apply for 190 after getting the skills assessment in South Australia? Okay, cool. So early childhood, I've done early childhood before. I think it doesn't even require the teachers registration board. An SA graduate, I think, had 3 months of experience requirement. So once you get the skills assessment, and prerequisite for that is the high IELTS score, 8877, and then skills assessment, then 3 months of experience. The challenge for the early childhood masters that you have to be a teacher and not an educator, which is like very close, but educator is skill level 4 job, whereas teacher is skill level 1. And these kindergartens or early childhood care centers tend to confuse the two roles or tend to write educator to everyone just because they don't want to spend more money on the teacher, because if they budget a teacher, they would have to pay substantially more. So let me know what your job is, whether you have found a job, and we'll discuss that. But we've had successful invitations with 3 months of experience for 190 in South Australia early childhood. Tejas, any further questions that you can see?
Vishaka, is it possible to hold 482 and still apply for 190 in software engineering? Vishaka, so you said short term for 482, which is only for 2 years, obviously, so that occupation would be on a short term list. Whereas for 190, you will be required to meet the state nomination requirements. So as long as you meet the state nomination, that is fine. So if I concern, let's say, South Australia, you're working as a web developer, which might be on a short-term list. Don't quote me if it's on the long-term list. I'm just giving an example. But then because it's assessed by ACS, so obviously South Australia as a state will be considering all the occupation as a closely related occupation, even if your skill assessment is in software engineering. So you can apply for 190 if you meet the requirements, but then this is the state nomination requirement. So other state might have a different requirements as well. So you have to make sure that you understand the 190 requirement for that particular state which you are currently staying as well.
Yeah, okay. Chances for private tutors in SA. Private tutors and teachers and tutors are an extremely competitive occupation. Mostly they are in the Talent and Innovators program. And the state of is kind of playing with them, putting them back and forth, back and forth. First, it says it's in the Talent and Innovator stream. Then it sets a 12 months experience requirement, etc. So what you should have a ready skills assessment, being ready to apply at any time. Same with TESOL teachers, teachers of English as a second language. Extremely competitive occupation, even in SA, but we've managed to get 491s, we've managed to get 190s. It's having a skills assessment in place, it's being ready, it's looking at how they play with the requirement and applying once there is a better requirement which suits you better. And let me grab one more quick question. Is graduate project engineer considered to be as a mechanical engineer? Very good, guys. It's not about the title, it's about the duties. Okay, so let me give you another example. Is an assistant mortgage broker considered to be a mortgage broker, a finance broker for the purpose of state nomination? Yes, they are. They can't get a license though, because it's the broker who's signing off the documents and they're assistant broker. But they do all the job, all the work of the broker, just under supervision. Saying, can a graduate accountant be considered as accountant? Can an assistant accountant be considered as accountant? Of course they have, if they do all the duties of the accountant under supervision, importantly. Engineer, you are a mechanical engineer by nature, not by title. Okay, so whatever they call you, graduate, project, associate, specialist, officer, whatever they call you, I say, show me the duties, send me through the duties. If you're doing engineer's work, you're an engineer. That's what important, not the title, because companies are playing with titles in all different ways. It's the duties that matter, and it's fine that you're a junior role. You're not expected to be on a senior role because you're a recent graduate. That's absolutely fine. Tejas, on to you.
Yeah, the last question I'll take. So someone asking is Victoria's next invitation round. So to be honest, they have not announced the next financial year, which is this financial year's processing timeframes and stuff. So obviously, once they announce the planning levels for the state nomination 190 and 491, that's when they will start accepting the ROIs. They might make some changes in terms of the priority sectors they're focusing on as well. So we will be doing another sessions as soon as that information is available to us as well. So do check our social media channels, either Facebook or Instagram or anything, and we'll have another sessions there as well regarding all the state nominations individually as well.
Okay, and I'm taking the last question as well then, because it has appeared twice, and I know that people have sent it multiple times, but I'm sorry, we're inundated with questions. We're trying to do our best. Best residency pathway for New Zealand PhD graduates. Look, first thing, we're going back to point A where we started. You need to have a skills assessment for all skill programs, okay? Now, does a skill assessment require a PhD? No, it doesn't. Even a university lecturer would be able to assess positively with bachelor's and master's. No need for PhD. However, PhD can be considered to be relevant education in the field. So it's necessary to look at all the profile, at the bachelor's, at the master's, at PhD, but most importantly, at work experience. Because even if you have a PhD, but you haven't taught, you haven't done research, not part of as PhD, but post-PhD, you can't be university lecturer. Yeah, VETSS will not give you a positive assessment as university lecturer because they want 1 year experience. But maybe someone doesn't have PhD, they just have bachelor's and master's, but they have taught at uni, they have done research at uni 1 year, they get a positive skills assessment. Then a PhD can be assessed in so many different ways. Say you have a PhD in life sciences. You can be a life scientist. You can be a microbiologist. You can be a biotechnologist, not only a university lecturer, but you need to have skills experience. This is skilled experience for positive skills assessment. That's point one. And point two, possibly a PhD graduate can do the global talent visa. But as I have said today, it's going to be extremely competitive. And you have to be absolutely outstanding as a PhD student and recognized internationally. So you have to be in a high impact journal, even if it's one publication, 2 publications, that's fine. In a high impact journal that it's difficult to get into, as an example, okay? Or not just publishing your articles, but reviewing someone else's articles already, even though you've just completed a PhD, being a reviewer, being invited to review by a reputable journal. Okay, that's what makes you stand out as a PhD. Tejas, I guess we have to finalize because we're getting a pile of them and we're never going to get through all of them, unfortunately. But we are very grateful. We're very grateful to your questions, and we're sorry if we're not able to answer some of them, just due to the pressure of time. Please get back to us. We'll be able to respond to you to each and every of you properly. Just give us some time for that. And just before Tejas says it's his final goodbye, my final goodbye is, we think we are very good at what we are doing because we as an organization have a wealth of experience. A wealth of experience. That's why we are excellent. Our claim for excellence. Thank you, everyone. Tejas.
Yeah, no, thank you everyone for attending this session, and thank you everyone for being part of this Conclave 2022 as well. So we do have still more sessions coming throughout the day. So make sure you do attend any of those sessions if they are useful to you. Devna will share the link in this comment section as well for other sessions. So and thanks everyone, and get in touch if you still have any more questions, or get in touch with any of our offices in your state if you want to book a consultation or wants to understand your migration prospects and stuff as well. And have a good day. Thank you.